For all my photos, I prefer to start in Lightroom, as Lightroom gives me some tools that make the additional blending and other work on the photos much easier. I also use Lightroom as the main organization tool that keeps all my photos so I can find anything I need rather quickly. But this is about the edits I'm making there, so let's take a look at it. I have here two different situations. One is a 7 set bracketed exposure and one is a single exposure photo. So let's first look at the bracketed series. But before I start, just a little tip. On the right side in Lightroom you have all the different categories what you can edit. Same in library, same in develop. But to make it much easier so you don't have to scroll all the time, if you click with the right click under the categories on the empty space and choose solo mode, the Lightroom will then behave so that every time you open one of the categories, all other gets closed. So only one is open at a certain time. This really helps because if you have all of them open, you will have to scroll up and down all the time and it really slows the work down. But let's select one of the photos to work on. So I'm selecting the middle exposure as that's usually the easiest to do, and I switch to develop. But before that, one more thing. If you want to rotate a photo, you have to do it in library, and as you see down here, the two rotate buttons, that has to be done here in library, not in the develop module. But let's jump to develop with that photo. As you can see in this photo, I have to correct a lot of stuff, and let's go to all the available tools to see what we can do. So from top down, I almost always have to crop a little. Like in this one, I see it's a little crooked, not that much, but let's crop it. If I don't want to change the aspect ratio, this lock should be locked because I want to keep the photo the same aspect ratio as it was when I shot it. So let's correct this. It's maybe just this. Okay, I click on it and it's cropped. I don't need to remove any spots. I do that in Photoshop. I usually don't do graduated filters because if you blend, you don't need it because you will just blend the sky from a different photo. And also radiant filters or adjustment brushes, I don't do that. I just do the basic corrections here. So what I do under the basic is I correct the white balance. This is much easier here than in Photoshop. So I'll just find the white balance I want. Okay, much warmer, maybe a little purple. Okay, I think this is already starting looking quite nicely. I don't do nothing with exposure, I do nothing with contrast, I don't need it here. Again, I do this mostly in Photoshop. Sometimes I change the highlights and shadow values. This is very useful if you have a series of photos like this one. Well, let's look at the darkest one. If I felt that in the darkest photo the highlights are still too bright, because in the darkest you don't want to have any highlights, so I can go and darken the darkest photo even more, which can help me later in the blending. Same with the brightest photo. If I feel that this part is still a little too dark, that I want even more detail in this area, I can pull up the shadows to make it even brighter. I don't have to, depends on the result I want to get. Also, again, this is a 7 exposure. If I only had 5 exposures or only 3 exposures, then this is much a bigger problem because this is really dark, so I really have to push it up so to get the detail. But let's get back to the middle exposure. So I corrected the white balance. I will do nothing here. Whites, blacks, again, I do that mostly in Photoshop after blending. You don't have to crop this before that. Clarity adds a lot of detail, but if you want that, do that at the end, not at the beginning, because it will make the blending harder. You can add a little color here if you feel that the photo is really colorless. When you blend after that, that makes actually no difference. You can add vibrance also in Photoshop. If you use a HDR tone mapping program after that to combine the shots. I suggest not adding any vibrance because the HDR tone mapping software usually adds a lot of color. So if you add it beforehand, it can get really oversaturated. Saturation only if you really need it, if your photo is really colorless. I usually change no tone curve, no color. Again, depends on the photo. If you have a photo where there is really strong color cast, you can try and correct it here, but I usually don't do this. I add a little noise reduction, really in this starting stage. If you shoot at a low ISO like 100 or 200, if you add just a little bit of noise reduction here, you will not have to do any more noise reduction. This is usually enough. If you shoot at the high ISO, like 800, 1600, add a little more noise reduction here, and then you probably still will have to do noise reduction on your finished photo because that's usually really noisy. But like here, only a little. No sharpening, I leave this at default, the 25. I can sharpen it later. Usually I sharpen photos just when I already have the resolution I want to use, so I don't sharpen the master file, the full size file, just the resolution I want to publish or I want to print. So this is detail. Then one more is under lens correction. Very important, remove chromatic aberrations. This is the best place to do this. It's better than doing it later because once you start blending, they can multiply and you will have much harder time removing them. So remove them right here, and you will never ever see any chromatic aberrations in your photo. Sometimes you have to go under color and add a little bit of defringe to purples and greens. If you really see that you use, maybe if you used a fisheye lens or a lens that really creates a lot of chromatic aberrations, sometimes you get these edges that are purple or green. Or when you have moving trees, leaves of trees in your shots, you will also see that quite often, so here you can correct that. Another thing under basic is enable profile correction. What it does is it will look on the lens you used and try to correct for the distortion and remove vignetting. This is something I personally use only from time to time because, as you can see, if it loads, it will distort the edges a little, and it depends on you, and it also loses a little bit of sharpness on the corners. Again, depends on the photo a lot. Like for this one, it looks better with it, but I can go under profile, and with the distortion scale I can change how much it corrects. So let's leave it to 100 here, and under it you can choose how much vignetting is removed. Again, depends a lot of the photo. Maybe on this one I would rather keep a little vignetting intact, so it's not completely the same brightness in the corners. Another thing you can do in lens corrections is manually correct the distortion of the lens. As you can see, I was looking a little up in this photo, so it looks like everything is falling away from me. You can see it nicely on this bridge in the background, that it should be straight, but it isn't. So I can go into the manual, and this is a vertical, so I will take the vertical until I have it straight. So as you can see now, the bridge is nice and straight with the edge. Same with the houses here, they no longer fall. This was before, as you can see, they fall. This is after. You can see that it created this white space in the bottom. You can use the constraint crop. If you click on it, it will constrain the crop so you don't see it. This is something I sometimes use but sometimes don't. There is a little problem with Lightroom when you have, like I have 7 shots and I then try to copy the same settings over to all shots. If you use the constraint crop, it can happen that not all the shots will get the same amount of cropping, and they will no longer align perfectly. So I rather do that, I leave this as it is, do what I need to do, like blending, and then crop the image already in Photoshop. So when I load all the files in Photoshop, I can correct this if I want, or I just crop it there, but I don't crop it here. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, so it's really hard to say. You can also crop it manually. This usually works better than using the constraint to crop. I can go like this. Okay, so it's nice and cropped. And that's all what I usually do here. I don't use any effects, I don't do more camera calibration, I do most of those edits in Photoshop. So once I have this one corrected, you can see how it was before. So this was before, and this is corrected. Now, once I have this, I can choose, you can hold the Control key and click on all the other photos from the same series, and I can click on Sync, and here I can choose what everything should be copied over to all the other shots. So usually I just check all and synchronize. See, they all change. Now all of them have the same settings, and all of them have also the same white balance, same vibrance, same crop, and everything. But again, be careful with the constraint crop, as that can lead to your shots not being cropped all the same way, and you have then problems with alignment later on. Once I have this, I just export this, File, Export. I have a preset done just for this export, but you can create yourself also one. It's quite easy, you just choose what you want. So I have a folder where I usually export everything. So I have mine is process, then there is a subfolder just for my TIFF exports, and what I change is image format TIFF, compression. I usually go with none. It doesn't really matter since all these files are temporary and I will delete them once I'm done with them, so I don't need it to be compressed. I use the Pro Photo RGB, as this one gives me the biggest color range for my photos, and I keep it at 16-bit TIFF files, so I don't down sample to 8-bit, leave it at 16-bit. No resizing, and that's all I do. I don't change anything else here. And you can add a new preset just by filling this out and creating add, and under user presets, let's call it new preset, and create. So, and it's already there. So each time I want to export, I just choose the preset I want and click on export. You can also, of course, open the files directly in Photoshop. If you want to work just in Photoshop from this, just right click, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. What this does is will export all the files you have selected and import them into Photoshop into one file, all as separate layers. So this is the workflow when I do with multiple exposures. What in the case I have only one raw file and I want to blend it together because it needs a little bit of correction. So let's take a look at this one. Again, let's start from start. Need a little cropping since I tend to work from top down. So first the cropping, I see it's a little off. Okay. Now it's nice and straight. It's a little to the blue side, so I go and make it a little warmer, maybe a little bit of purple, or maybe not that much. Currently, maybe again a little bit of vibrance, shadows, highlights I won't change, I will show you soon why. no tone curve, nothing here. Detail, I will add a little bit of noise reduction, lens correction, I will remove chromatic aberrations, and I will enable profile correction. As you can see, it removed all the vignetting, so I will put them a little back because it's too much. And it's still a little crooked, so I will go on to the lens correction manual and correct that. Now I have to crop a little more since... Okay, so now the basics are corrected, and how now to continue with this? I will create two versions of this. One, I will underexpose, maybe minus 0.5, and this is my base for the sky. So I can export this, just File, Export, choose my preset, export, and then I create another version just for the middle area. This is currently very dark, so I will push the exposure up, again maybe plus 0.5, and I will do another export, same preset, export, and use unique name, because if you override you will lose another file. Right now I have two files, and I can use these two files to blend the image in Photoshop. Same as I would have if I shot two exposures. This works with photos with a lower dynamic range. If this was much more contrast in this photo, this wouldn't work, as you cannot really pull that much info from a single RAW. I, of course, could have done this also in Lightroom, just brightening the shadows and doing nothing else. But if I do that, it will also affect parts of the water and another areas which I don't like. So I rather export it twice and then just use exposure blending to blend the images. We will look at this photo in another video, so you see exactly how I would blend it.